All right, so welcome back to another midweek with Double Creek. Today we are in week 40 of our 52 weeks with Jesus. Today we start a new section in this book. Today we are in section 6 of this book that is 52 weeks long. This section is called Jesus the Helper. And this is a shorter section than some of the others. In fact, the rest of the sections that we will be looking through, that we're going to go through all the way up to week 52 are smaller, they're shorter. Section 6 that we're starting tonight has 5 weeks in it. And we're going to be looking at different passages of Scripture where Jesus helped someone in some way. And generally, when Jesus was helping someone, as we're going to see today, he was generally helping people that others wouldn't help or that others wouldn't want or have anything to do with. The title of today's lesson is called The Thirst Quencher. Now, when you see the title of this and you know that we're looking at a story of Jesus when he helped someone, when he was there for someone, you probably get a pretty good idea of which story we are already talking about. The story that we're going to be focusing on today comes from John chapter 4, and it's verses 1 through 42. So it's a very long passage. We're not going to be reading all of those verses today. It's going to be more of talking through those verses and looking at a couple of them here or there. But as we go through this lesson, remember that as we go through it, we're just going to be talking about it and looking at a few verses here and there. Now, when you think of a thirst quencher, what do you think of? Most people are going to think of something you drink when you are thirsty. So if you're thirsty, what is your choice of drink? What would you grab? What would you drink if you had the chance? Say that you walk into your house. You've been outside in the heat of the day doing a lot of work. You come in sweating. You're tired. You're weary. You're thirsty. You go to the refrigerator. You have a few options. What is the one option that you would have, that you would choose out of all the other options that you have in there? Because you probably have several options. For somebody, it might be water. For someone else, it might be Gatorade or some other drink they like. For someone else, it might be grabbing a cold beer, sitting down and just relaxing as they cool off. There are a lot of different options that people will go with when they're looking for something to quench their thirst. Well, here today, we're going to be looking at a time when Jesus was thirsty, when he was tired, but also in this story, we're going to see once again how Jesus twists the story as he so often does. And so to get started, I first want us to read what Merritt writes as he opens up this 6th section of his book called Jesus the Helper. He writes something at the beginning of each new section, just a paragraph or so that gives us a short introduction to the section. And here's what he writes as he opens up this 6th section called Jesus the Helper. He said, one of Jesus' most endearing qualities was the way he proactively pursued the outcast and outsider. He was a man of the people, not just the privileged. He was a master for the masses, not a rabbi for the rich. Jesus sought out those that society avoided, mocked, and ridiculed. He was willing to help anyone at any time, even if they didn't realize they needed help. Jesus' most scandalous encounters reveal his role as a helper of the helpless and the hope of the hopeless, all the while changing we see others and ourselves. I like the way Merritt chose to open up this section with those words right here. And I think the reason that I like those words so much is because I think we should see a lot of ourselves in those descriptions. Merritt mentions that Jesus was a man of the people in that short paragraph. And that's true. He was a man for all people. He never turned away from someone because they weren't good enough for him, like you might see in our society. In fact, he did just the opposite. Merritt also points out that Jesus sought out those that society avoided, that they mocked, that they ridiculed. Think about that. The people that society would avoid, that they would make fun of, that they would ridicule, Jesus didn't just help them. He sought those people out. Jesus knew what he was doing, obviously, and he knew exactly who his next encounter was going to be with. Merritt even points out that Jesus helped people when they didn't even realize they needed his help. You know, how often might we see that in our world? How often might we see these things in ourselves or people that come to church? Sometimes we might feel so good that we don't even realize, I guess, how much we really need Jesus. And Merritt also points out that Jesus is a helper to the helpless. He is the hope to the hopeless. And Jesus came to do just that, didn't he? For broken people like us who need help, Jesus is there. For broken people like us who needed hope, Jesus brought hope for us. In many different ways, we are all of those people that Merritt mentions there in that short paragraph to introduce this section. And then Merritt jumps into this chapter called the Thirst Quencher. He starts off by talking about messy mess-ups. You know, have you ever made a mess of something? I mean, of course we all have. Maybe for some it was a mistake that was very costly. Maybe for someone else it was a mistake that wasn't too bad, didn't hang around very long. Most likely we've all had our share of both of those kinds of mistakes. Merritt talks about a huge mistake that took place in 2006 for a company called Lidlaya Airlines. I think that's how you say it. I don't know anything about this airline really, but they are out of Italy. And in 2006, someone made a slight mistake on its website. They advertised business class seats from Toronto to Cyprus for $39. Very cheap flight if you've ever looked at the cost of flying on a plane somewhere. Well, the ticket price was supposed to be $3,900, $3,900, but an employee left off the 2 zeros and had it listed at $39. And customers ended up buying 2,000 of those $39 tickets. You know how much it ended up costing the airline? It cost the airline $7.7 million. As I said, it was a slight mistake. Just forgot to put a couple of zeros in there, but this was a costly mistake. Somebody had messed up big time. You know, we've all been in a situation where we've messed up in some way. We've messed something up. And when we do, sometimes it gets to be a burden. It gives us a burden that is just difficult to bear, hard to get rid of. But hear this. Just because you've messed up doesn't mean you have to stay messed up. The Apostle John in his gospel, here in chapter 4, he tells of an amazing encounter between Jesus and a woman that many would consider to be all messed up in life. And as Merritt points out, it's the longest conversation that we have in the Gospels between Jesus and one particular individual. When you first read the story, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. It seems like it's rather ordinary for most of it. There's a woman whose name we never read. We don't know her name. She's doing one of the most boring tasks that she could have done, that she needed to perform every day. She was going to draw water from a well. This was an everyday thing. She was by herself, which is the way, which is what they typically did. The women went by themselves. And in reality, no man would even give her the time of day or talk to her unless it was for the wrong reasons. But Jesus comes along here in this story and he does the unthinkable. He begins a conversation with this woman that would forever change her life. And what this encounter should show us is, one, really how to treat people who may appear to be messed up or who may have messed up some things at some point in time. As Merritt points out, he points that out that when we fess to our mess-ups, when we fess up to our mess-ups, Jesus will clean up our messes. Because we all have some messy mess-ups here. And Merritt then goes on to remind us of a few things. First is that we should know that Jesus is waiting to meet us. Now, this is pretty interesting for me to think about right here. And I say that because I think sometimes we do this a lot with things. We go through life searching for Jesus and waiting for Jesus. But in reality, Jesus is already there waiting for us. Sometimes we just don't slow down enough to see him. Now, in this story in John chapter 4, Jesus is not just at any old well. He's in Samaria at Jacob's well. This well has been there for a couple of thousand years now. So anybody who read John's account of the gospel back there in that first century, they would know exactly what well John was talking about and where it was located. Moses wrote about this well way back in Scripture. It was a field that Jacob had purchased way back in Genesis so that he could pitch his tent in the land of Canaan. And when you think about it, this is the first place of real estate in the Bible that we read about where a Jew ever owned a piece of the land of Canaan, what we came to know as the Promised Land. So this is a well that would be well known to the people of Israel when John's writing about this in his gospel. But if you think that's natural, or this is a normal place or a normal well for Jesus to visit, you'd be wrong. Jesus, like other Jews, never ever went through Samaria. In fact, Samaria was a place that Jews tried to avoid at all costs. Any self-respecting Jew would actually take a detour around Samaria, even if it meant adding another day to their journey, just so they didn't have to step foot in that place. But Jesus, he goes to this well in Samaria. And as we read, as you can read in the 6th verse of this 4th chapter, it's about the 6th hour of the day, which would mean it's noon. And John adds this tidbit here because it's very important that we know when Jesus was there and when this woman came. Because it helps us to understand even more about what's really going on here in this story and why it's a little bit strange. This lady comes to the well at noon. It was the heat of the day. See, when women typically went to draw water from a well, they would do so early in the morning or late in the day before sundown. And sometimes they would typically do it as a group because the water jugs would be heavy, and so they could help each other, help somebody pick it up and get it up to where they could carry it, different things like that. And what this shows us here is this. This woman, whose name we never read, whose name we do not know, was obviously an outcast. She was someone that the people avoided, and apparently she had probably messed up so bad or so much that she did what she needed to do to avoid everybody else. Even if it meant carrying that water in the hottest part of the day and all alone. Now, what this lady didn't know was that someone named Jesus was going to be at this well waiting to meet her, waiting to change her life. Because for her and for us today, someone wants to meet you. In this story, Jesus is sitting on top of the well. He's just waiting for her. And he knows that she's going to be coming to this well shortly. In the 6th verse, you can read that Jesus is weary. He's tired, showing us that his body is a human body just like ours. He was tired. He was thirsty from his journey. And he's also sitting on this well, which wasn't normal. As a man, it would have been customary. It would have been the custom for a man to stand back at a distance of around 20 feet or so. This would indicate that it was safe for a woman to come up to the well and draw water. But Jesus doesn't do that. He doesn't move from the well. He stays right there. He's sitting at the well because he's waiting to meet her. Now, there's something else to remember about the customs of that day. A man, especially a stranger, they would not talk to a woman they didn't know. In fact, they also wouldn't make eye contact with the stranger, with the woman. So Jesus here in this meeting, he breaks a racial barrier, being a Jew, talking to a Samaritan woman, and he breaks a sexual barrier, all in one day, all at one meeting. In this one moment, he breaks a 700-year hatred that has been there between Jews and Samaritans. And this woman, she's shocked. Jesus breaks the ice here in this situation. He asks her for a drink. And she responds to him in this way, in verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealing with Samaritans." She was stunned by Jesus doing something that seems as simple and as normal to us as asking for a drink of water. So she points out what I had just mentioned. For one, he's a man. She's a woman. Second, Jesus is a Jew. She's a Samaritan. What she doesn't understand is that Jesus chose this place. He could have avoided this, like all the other Jews, this city. He could have totally avoided Samaria and gone around, but he wasn't there. But he was there with a purpose. Jesus chose this time. He chose this place and this particular woman to have this important, one of the greatest conversations that we read about Jesus having with someone. A woman who was an outcast, a woman who was shut out from society to the point of where she wouldn't even draw water with the other women or even show her face really around other women. She went in the hottest part of the day, but Jesus is right there just sitting at the well and waiting for her. And today, for us, he's waiting to meet us too. A quick lesson we can take right here from here is this. Jesus isn't bothered about who we are, what we've done, and he's certainly not bothered by what others think of us. Jesus is here. He's there waiting to meet us to change our lives. And when you read the story of this encounter, we should believe that Jesus is willing to accept us. Before you go to bed tonight, or sometime today, or maybe in the morning or whatever, take a couple of minutes and just read John chapter 4, verses 1 through 42 to capture the whole story that we're looking at today, because there's more to this story. Because what we see in this encounter is a Jewish man talking to a Samaritan woman, which is a big one, a big no-no, really, if you want to say so. And he's also letting her know that he's willing to take a drink from her filthy, sin-contaminated Samaritan jug. There's a lot of things going on here that we don't realize if we just read through this story as quickly as we can. But for this woman, for the first time in a long time, if ever, a man was looking into her eyes, and not looking into her eyes with lust, but looking into her eyes with love. She's blown away by this encounter, as we will see. Because then out of nowhere, Jesus, as he likes to do, turns this conversation all the way around. At first he was thirsty, he needed water. But then he shows her that you're really the one that's thirsty, and I have the water that you need. In this conversation, Jesus lets her know that his water, well, when someone has the water that he provides, they'll never be thirsty again. Now we know that Jesus is not talking about physical water, but she wants some of what he has. And Jesus then tells her in the 16th verse, he says, "Go, call your husband and come here." And what was her response? Her response is, "I don't have a husband," which was true in a way. But Jesus, being Jesus, does the unthinkable here. He says to her, "You are right in saying you have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you are married to and the one you are now with is not your husband. Can you imagine the look on her face? She'd never met this man before in her life. How does he know all this? Now, we have no idea what happened in all of her other marriages. We don't know if they ended in divorce. We don't know if her husbands died or what. We just don't know. The assumption tends to always be that her marriages ended in divorce. The Bible doesn't tell us that, though. And Jesus doesn't mention it. Maybe it's because that's not what was important. That's not what his purpose was for being there. He didn't come there to call her out on stuff so much as he wanted to call her to himself. He says this to her really to let her know who he is. And at this point, she knows that someone great knows all about her past, her present, everything. And she doesn't know how or why. She expects judgment here from Jesus. But instead of judging her, Jesus offers himself to her. And he shows her through this that your past doesn't matter. Who she is now, who she has been doesn't matter. What really matters is who she is, who she will be from this moment on. See, we have to believe that Jesus is willing to accept us. I've said it before here. Jesus accepts us as we are. He just doesn't want us to stay that way. He wants us to change. He wants to change us. And we should also rejoice that Jesus wants to change us. I've used this word here many times, I think, on Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights, broken. We simply are broken people. And without Jesus, we would continue to be broken people. But when we commit to Jesus, our brokenness becomes beautiful at the hand of God. The story goes on here in chapter 4 to even more excitement for her. She tells Jesus that, listen, she knows the Messiah is to come. And she says when he comes, he's going to tell us all things. And what does Jesus say to her? In verse 26, Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Jesus makes it clear to her, right then and there, that he is the Messiah. Merritt points out that the Greek language that this was actually written in is stronger than the way we kind of interpret it and translate it into our English Bibles today. In the Greek language, Merritt points out that it's like Jesus is saying this, the one who is speaking to you is I am, which is very important. Maybe not to many of us, but very important because anybody who knew the Old Testament would know that I am is how God referred to himself way back with Moses. So Jesus, in this one moment, with this one woman, very unusual encounter, is claiming that he is God. Never before had anyone come out with such a bold claim because they couldn't. And remember, Jesus doesn't do this with a Jew. He does it with a Samaritan. And he doesn't do it with a Samaritan man. He does it with a Samaritan woman. See, we can miss so much here because in our day and age, it's completely normal for a man to just go up to a woman and start having a conversation with her. Everything Jesus does here was out of place for that day and time. It was different. It was unexpected. Then again, that's kind of what Jesus does over and over, and still today. Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria. He chose to go to this out-of-the-way town, one he would not be accepted in, to extend the love of God to one of the most unusual women you would expect in the Bible. And after he does this, what does she do? In verses 28 and 29, it tells us this. So the woman left her water jar and went away to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? And then we read that those people in the town, that they went and they were coming to him. They had to see Jesus themselves. As we finish up here, what we see here, especially in this verse right here, she came to draw water. But she was so excited by all of this, by all she had seen and heard, that she just left her jug there and went to tell others about Jesus instead. Kind of goes along with the series that we're looking at here on Sunday mornings here at Double Creek called Acts, the Gospel Shared. She was so excited that she just couldn't wait to go and tell others. For us, we need that excitement. Perhaps we need to drop some of the things that we see as most important to us and respond to Jesus. And when we do, Jesus is right there waiting for us, waiting to accept us, waiting for us to accept him, because that's just who he is. I want to thank you for joining us here for our midweek time this week. Hope you guys are doing well. Stay safe, and God bless.